When Staff Sergeant Daniel Cruz left for deployment overseas, he thought everything back home was secure. His small parcel of land, the future home he had dreamed of building after his service, and the quiet neighborhood he had invested in. But when he returned, he discovered the unimaginable. The Homeowners Association, HOA, had sold his property at a tax lien auction, citing unpaid dues despite the protections afforded to active-duty military under federal law. At first, Daniel felt powerless, but then he sought legal counsel and filed under the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. The court found the HOA had violated federal protections. Because the subdivision's expansion was partly built on his land, the judgment led to the repossession of the illegally developed property. What began as the theft of a soldier's dream turned into a cautionary tale for predatory HOAs everywhere. Mess with a service member's rights, and When considering the story of a service member who returned from deployment only to discover that the land he rightfully owned had been sold by his homeowners association, the first and most essential key point to explore is the personal impact of such a violation. This is not merely about financial loss, nor is it only about a piece of land changing ownership. It is about trust, sacrifice, identity, and the disruption of a soldier's vision for his future. To understand this impact, one has to start with the recognition that military service already requires men and women to put their lives on hold. They are sent away from families, homes, and communities for extended periods, not for personal gain, but to serve and protect their country. In doing so, they assume that the most basic aspects of their civilian lives, their property, finances, and legal rights will remain intact until their return. When that trust is broken, the wound is far deeper than the surface value of what was taken. A parcel of land is not just soil and grass. For a service member, it often symbolizes stability after the uncertainty of deployment. It may represent the home they plan to build for their family, a nest egg for retirement, or simply a place to anchor themselves after years of moving from base to base. To come home and find that land gone, sold off by an HOA under questionable circumstances, is to lose not only property, but also the sense of security and stability that was supposed to greet them after service. This kind of betrayal also takes an emotional toll because it undermines the faith a soldier has in the civilian systems that are supposed to function honorably in their absence. Imagine returning from months or years in an environment where vigilance, loyalty, and duty are everything, only to find that back home, those same values were ignored or exploited. The psychological effect can be devastating. It sends the message that while the service member was protecting the rights of others, their own rights were being disregarded by the very institutions meant to safeguard them. That kind of dissonance can create feelings of anger, alienation, and even hopelessness. Furthermore, the personal impact extends to the family. Many service members go on deployment knowing that their spouses, children, or parents are depending on the stability of the property they leave behind. If that property is unlawfully taken, the entire family feels the consequences. A spouse may lose the sense of security that comes from owning a home. Children may lose the promise of a future place to grow up, and parents may feel the strain of trying to support a returning veteran who is now forced to rebuild from scratch. The ripple effect of the HOA's actions, therefore, is not limited to one individual. It destabilizes an entire household. There is also the matter of dignity. Military service comes with an expectation of honor, the idea that those who serve will return home to respect and recognition. Being stripped of property while away on duty cuts directly against this cultural expectation. It diminishes the sacrifices made and communicates a disturbing message that the service members' contributions are valued less than bureaucratic convenience or profit motives. For many, this is perhaps the deepest cut of all, the sense that their years of sacrifice were met not with gratitude, but with disregard. From an educational standpoint, it is crucial for communities and institutions to understand that when a service member loses property in this way, it cannot be viewed as an ordinary transaction. The land is tied to identity, sacrifice, and long-term dreams. Losing it during deployment is not simply a matter of paperwork. It represents the erasure of a piece of the future they fought to preserve. This is why laws such as the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act exist, to prevent such harm by recognizing the unique vulnerabilities of deployed military personnel. Understanding the depth of the personal impact is the first step in ensuring that these protections are respected and enforced. When society grasps how profoundly damaging such violations are, it can begin to take the measures necessary to safeguard service members and honor the sacrifices they make.
Focuses on the legal protections available to service members, with particular attention to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, often abbreviated as SCRA. This piece of legislation is not simply a technical legal framework. It represents a commitment by society to ensure that those who are called away to serve their country are not disadvantaged in their civilian lives while fulfilling their duties. The idea is rooted in fairness. A service member deployed abroad or assigned to a distant base cannot be reasonably expected to monitor every piece of mail, appear at every court proceeding, or respond immediately to financial and property disputes back home. Without protection, this gap in presence would make them highly vulnerable to losing homes, land, vehicles, and even custody rights. The SCRA was designed to prevent exactly that, to balance the playing field by pausing or limiting certain legal and financial actions against service members during their period of active duty. The SCRA extends its protections across a broad range of areas. For example, it restricts foreclosures, evictions, and repossessions, ensuring that a service member cannot lose a home or vehicle while away. It prevents default judgments in court without proper legal representation, recognizing that someone deployed cannot simply appear in court to defend themselves. It allows for the termination of leases without penalty when duty requires relocation. It even provides protections against excessive interest rates on loans, capping them at 6% during the period of active duty. These measures may seem technical on the surface, but they collectively represent a shield that allows service members to focus on their mission without constantly worrying that their absence will be exploited back home. The protections extend directly to property ownership. If a homeowners association or other entity attempts to foreclose on or sell property owned by a service member during deployment without adhering to the legal safeguards in place, they are in violation of federal law. This is not a minor administrative error. It is a direct infringement upon rights that have been codified to honor the sacrifices of military service. The law has consistently upheld the seriousness of these protections, often reversing illegal sales, imposing penalties on violators, and restoring the service member's property when possible. The law recognizes that the absence of the service member is not voluntary in the way a civilian absence might be. It is a mandated duty to the country, and the individual should not suffer personal losses because of it. Education about these protections is crucial, not only for service members, but also for organizations such as HOAs, lenders, and local governments. Too often, violations occurred not just out of malice or greed, but also out of ignorance of the law. A property manager may see unpaid dues and initiate proceedings without realizing that the owner is deployed and legally protected. While ignorance is not a defense, it highlights the importance of awareness and training. By ensuring that HOAs and similar organizations understand the obligations imposed by the SCRA, many of these injustices can be prevented before they ever occur. It is also important to recognize that these protections have a broader social purpose. They signal to service members that their country values their contributions enough to safeguard their civilian interests while they serve. This assurance helps maintain morale and provides peace of mind to those in uniform. If a soldier knows that their home and property will be safe while they are deployed, they can concentrate fully on their mission. Without this assurance, every deployment would carry the added burden of constant fear about what might be happening back home. That kind of distraction could not only harm the individual, but potentially impact the effectiveness of the unit and the mission itself. Finally, the SCRA stands as a reminder to society of the obligations we carry toward those who serve. It is not enough to thank service members for their service in words. Protections like the SCRA are the practical, enforceable ways we honor that service. When a homeowners association disregards those protections and sells a service member's land, they are not just breaking a law. They are undermining the principle of fairness and the trust that service members place in their communities. By learning about and respecting the SCRA, organizations and individuals help preserve that trust and ensure that no service member returns from deployment to find their life dismantled in their absence.
Accountability and consequences form one of the most important lessons from the story of a service member whose land was wrongfully sold during deployment. When organizations such as homeowners associations take actions that disregard federal protections, the results can extend far beyond a single property dispute. The principle at stake is not only about whether a parcel of land was mishandled, but also about whether institutions that manage community life can be trusted to act lawfully, fairly, and responsibly. If an HOA ignores the legal safeguards established for deployed service members, it is engaging in more than a technical violation. It is exposing itself to serious legal, financial, and reputational consequences that can reshape entire neighborhoods. The first level of accountability is legal. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act is a federal statute, and violating it brings weighty consequences. Courts do not treat these cases lightly because the law was created to protect individuals who cannot protect themselves in the same way as civilians due to military obligations. If an HOA or any similar body proceeds with foreclosure or property sales while disregarding the protections of the SCRA, courts have the authority to invalidate those sales, reverse property transfers, and even penalize the offending entity with fines or damages. In some cases, the consequences may include restitution, where the organization must compensate the service member not only for the property, but also for the emotional distress, legal fees, and financial damage caused. This establishes a legal precedent that deters other organizations from attempting similar actions. Financial accountability often follows legal consequences. A subdivision or HOA that acts improperly may find itself facing lawsuits not only from the service member affected, but also from residents who discover their own property values or community standing have been compromised. The costs of litigation, settlements, and property restoration can bankrupt smaller associations or place massive financial strain on larger ones. Insurance policies may not always cover intentional legal violations, leaving members of the association directly responsible for paying damages. In effect, the reckless decision of a board to bypass protections can become an expensive burden on the entire community. This dynamic underscores why accountability matters, not only for justice in one case, but also for the financial stability of neighborhoods that rely on proper governance.
Beyond legal and financial repercussions, the reputational consequences for an HOA or subdivision are significant. Communities thrive on trust, and once that trust is broken, it can be difficult to restore. If residents learn that their association unlawfully sold the land of a service member, confidence in the leadership erodes. New families may avoid buying into the community, fearing mismanagement or unethical behavior. Existing residents may demand resignations, reforms, or even dissolution of the HOA. Reputation, once lost, is not easily regained, and in this sense, the violation of one service member's rights can have a long-lasting effect on the stability and growth of the entire subdivision. Educationally, this key point emphasizes why systems of accountability are not optional but essential. Without accountability, organizations can act in ways that prioritize convenience, financial gain, or negligence over fairness and legality. Consequences ensure that when mistakes or violations occur, they are not repeated. In the context of HOAs, which wield considerable power over property rights, accountability mechanisms serve as a check against abuse. They remind board members that they are not above the law and that their authority comes with responsibilities to both individual homeowners and the larger legal framework of the nation. Another dimension of accountability involves the broader social message. When a service member successfully holds an HOA accountable, it sends a signal not just to that community, but to HOAs across the country. It reminds organizations that service members are protected, that the law favors fairness, and that exploitation will not go unchecked. This ripple effect can lead to broader compliance, as associations educate themselves, adopt clearer policies, and seek legal advice before acting in ways that could violate protections. In this way, one case of accountability can improve conditions for service members across many communities. The consequences also serve to reinforce respect for military service within civilian society. By holding organizations accountable for actions that harm service members, society demonstrates that it values the sacrifices of those in uniform. The act of repossessing property or penalizing violators is not simply about restoring land. It is about reaffirming the principle that military service deserves safeguarding. Without such consequences, the protections enshrined in law would be meaningless, little more than words on paper without teeth. Ultimately, accountability and consequences ensure balance between power and responsibility. Homeowners associations, lenders, and other organizations play vital roles in managing civilian life, but when their power goes unchecked, they can easily overstep and harm those least able to defend themselves in the moment. By holding them accountable, courts, communities, and individuals ensure that justice is preserved, trust is maintained, and service members return to a society that honors their sacrifices not just in rhetoric, but in action.
A call for awareness and reform becomes the natural conclusion after understanding the personal impact, legal protections, and consequences involved in cases where service members are wronged by institutions like homeowners associations. Awareness is the first step toward prevention. Far too often, violations against deployed service members happen not only because of deliberate exploitation, but also because of ignorance, oversight, or outdated policies. When HOAs, lenders, or property managers do not fully understand the obligations imposed by federal law, they make decisions that may seem routine, such as initiating a foreclosure or auction, but in reality are violations of service members' rights. By raising awareness about the existence and requirements of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act and similar protections, communities can reduce the likelihood of harmful actions ever being taken in the first place. Awareness is not only necessary for organizations, but also for service members themselves. Many men and women in uniform are not fully familiar with the breadth of protections available to them under the law. Some may assume that they are powerless to fight back against decisions made in their absence, while others may not realize that a simple communication with legal aid or a commanding officer could prevent a wrongful foreclosure or sale. Educating service members about their rights ensures they can act proactively before deployment, such as by designating a trusted representative, filing appropriate notices, or informing HOAs and lenders of their protected status. This empowerment can stop violations before they happen and lessen the stress of deployment by assuring service members that their property and finances are secure. Reform comes into focus when we examine the limitations of existing structures. The SCRA provides powerful protections, but enforcement often relies on service members themselves pursuing legal action after a violation has occurred. For many, this is a heavy burden to carry immediately upon returning from deployment, when they should be focusing on reintegration, family, and healing. Stronger enforcement mechanisms at the institutional level could shift the burden away from individual service members. For example, government agencies could be granted greater authority to monitor compliance, investigate complaints, and impose penalties without requiring lengthy litigation. Additionally, mandatory training for HOA boards, property managers, and lenders could be instituted as part of licensing or certification requirements, ensuring that those with the power to affect property rights cannot plead ignorance of the law. Reform also requires cultural change within communities. HOAs are designed to protect the value of neighborhoods and represent the interests of residents, yet in practice, they sometimes operate with little oversight and a disproportionate focus on rules and dues. When the mission of such organizations becomes disconnected from fairness, they risk harming the very people they're meant to serve. By reforming bylaws to explicitly account for service members' rights and instituting transparent procedures for handling cases of deployment, HOAs can strengthen both their integrity and the trust of the community. In fact, many communities could benefit from going further, adopting voluntary protections that exceed federal requirements as a gesture of respect toward those in uniform. Another important aspect of reform is legislative improvement. Laws can and should evolve as new challenges emerge. For instance, the digital age has changed how property records, dues, and notices are managed, yet many legal protections were written with older systems in mind. Legislators could strengthen protections by requiring electronic safeguards, mandatory verification of military status before property actions, and penalties scaled to the harm caused. Such reforms would not only reinforce the intent of the SCRA, but also modernize it for the realities of today's property management practices. At the heart of both awareness and reform is a deeper social obligation. Protecting service members from unfair treatment is more than a legal technicality. It is a moral imperative. The men and women who put their lives on the line should not return home to find themselves stripped of the very rights they defended abroad. Communities must internalize this truth, recognizing that honoring service means creating systems that prevent harm rather than merely addressing it after the fact. This requires conversations at neighborhood meetings, training sessions for board members, education and military pre-deployment briefings, and advocacy from lawmakers. Every layer of society has a role to play in ensuring service members are protected in practice, not just in principle. Ultimately, a call for awareness and reform is about building a culture of respect and responsibility. Awareness ensures that service members, organizations, and communities understand both the rights at stake and the obligations involved. Reform ensures that when gaps appear, systems are improved to close them. Together, they form a framework that honors sacrifice not only with words, but with tangible protections. By educating ourselves, reforming our institutions, and strengthening our laws, we create a society where no soldier has to wonder if their land, home, or future will be waiting for them when they return. That is the true measure of gratitude for service, a promise kept, a right protected, and a community that stands in solidarity with those who stand in defense of it.